Some places aren't abandoned. They're waiting for the one person who was always meant to return. And Ethan Cole felt that the moment his truck tires crunched over the frozen gravel leading up to the cabin, the engine falling silent, as if the world itself had taken a breath, and beside him Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, didn't move, didn't blink, just stared through the windshield with ears locked forward, listening to something that hadn't made a sound yet, the kind of stillness that didn't feel empty but full, heavy, like the air was holding onto a memory it refused to release. The cabin sat at the edge of the woods, half swallowed by shadow, its weathered boards darkened by years of snow and rain, windows clouded like tired eyes that had seen too much and decided never to speak of it again. Ethan stepped out, boots pressing into a thin crust of ice, the cold biting through his jeans. But it wasn't the temperature that made his shoulders tighten, it was the silence. No birds, no wind, not even the distant hum of a highway, just nothing. And yet Rex finally moved, slowly stepping down from the truck, nose twitching, head low, every muscle alert, as if the ground beneath them was whispering something only he could hear. Ethan exhaled and glanced at the folded paper in his hand. The deed, $500 for a cabin no one wanted, too cheap to make sense, too quiet to feel right. But he had learned long ago that the world often hid its answers in places others avoided. He pushed the door open and it creaked softly. Not loud, not sharp, just enough to echo deeper than it should have. Inside the air was colder, not the natural kind but the kind that clung to your skin, dry and still, carrying a faint metallic scent that didn't belong in wood and dust. Rex stepped in ahead of him, nails clicking lightly against the floor, then stopping abruptly, his body stiffening as his head turned toward the far wall. And for a moment, nothing happened. No sound, no movement. Just that same unbearable stillness, until Rex let out a low, uncertain breath, not quite a growl, not quite fear, something older, something instinctive, and Ethan felt it then, a subtle vibration beneath his boots, so faint it could have been imagined. A slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat buried deep under the floorboards. He stood there, listening, counting without realizing it, 1, 2, 3, until it came again, the same rhythm, the same quiet insistence, and Rex took one step forward, then another, as if drawn to it, as if he already knew exactly where it was coming from, and Ethan followed, because sometimes the only way to understand a place like this is to listen to the one who hears what you cannot. The pulse did not fade. It lingered beneath the floor like something patient, something that had been waiting longer than Ethan cared to imagine, and as Rex moved forward, each step deliberate and quiet, the boards beneath them gave a faint response, not a creak, not a groan, but a subtle shift that felt almost intentional, as if the cabin itself was aware of their presence. Ethan knelt slowly, pressing his palm against the wood, and there it was again, that same steady rhythm, not loud enough to hear, but strong enough to feel, like a distant engine buried deep beneath layers of earth and time. He frowned, his mind reaching for logic, for pipes, for shifting ground, for anything that made sense. But nothing about this place had felt normal since the moment they arrived. Rex lowered his head beside him, nose brushing the floor, then paused, ears tilting back for a brief second before snapping forward again, his amber eyes fixed on a single spot just inches away from Ethan's hand. And without hesitation, the dog lifted his paw and tapped the wood once. Then again, softer this time, as if signaling rather than digging. Ethan followed the motion and noticed it then. The grain of the wood was wrong, slightly darker, slightly smoother, like a piece that had been replaced long ago, but never quite matched the rest. He traced the edge with his fingers and felt a faint line, almost invisible unless you knew where to look, a seam. His breath slowed as a quiet understanding settled over him. This was not just a floor, it was a cover. The air around them seemed to tighten, the kind of pressure that builds before a storm, though outside the trees stood completely still, not a single branch moving. Rex let out a low sound, not fear, not warning, but something closer to anticipation, and Ethan could not explain why, but he trusted it. He always had. Reaching into his pack, he pulled out a small folding knife and carefully slid the edge into the seam. The wood resisted at first, then gave way with a soft shift, lifting slightly as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. The pulse beneath them stopped instantly, not fading, not slowing, just gone, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before, like a room that had just been emptied of something important. Ethan hesitated, his hand resting on the edge of the loosened board, every instinct telling him to pause, to think, to step back, but Rex stepped closer instead, placing himself right beside the opening, his body steady, his gaze unwavering, as if whatever was hidden below did not scare him. It recognized him, and slowly, with controlled breath, Ethan lifted the board, revealing a dark space beneath, not deep, not endless, just enough to hold something concealed, and within that shadow, a cold draft rose, brushing against his face with a faint metallic scent, sharper now, clearer, like old steel and forgotten time. He leaned closer, eyes adjusting to the dimness. And there it was, a surface that did not belong to the cabin at all, smooth, solid, and unmistakably man-made. A steel panel set into the earth, its edges lined with bolts worn by years but still intact, and at its center, a handle, small, rusted, and positioned as if it had not been touched in decades. Rex did not move, did not bark, he simply watched, and in that quiet moment, Ethan understood something he could not fully explain. This was not something hidden by accident. This was something left behind on purpose, and somehow, in a way that made no sense yet felt undeniable. It had been waiting for him to find it. The handle did not look like it had been meant for hands. It was too small, too deliberate. The kind of design that belonged to something functional rather than something comfortable, and Ethan hovered there for a moment, fingers inches away, feeling the cold rise from the opening like a quiet warning. Not sharp, not sudden, just present, the kind of cold that carried weight, that settled into your skin and asked you to pay attention. Rex shifted slightly beside him, not backing away, not pushing forward, just watching, his breathing slow and steady, as if whatever lay beneath that steel panel was not unknown to him. And Ethan found himself studying the bolts around the edges, noticing how they had aged, not evenly, not randomly, but in a pattern that suggested time had touched them differently, as if something beneath had once generated heat, or movement, or purpose, long after the cabin above had been forgotten. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible now in the chilled air, and wrapped his fingers around the handle, expecting resistance, expecting the kind of stubborn weight that came from years of neglect, but instead it moved, not easily, but smoothly, like something that had been maintained by silence itself. The panel shifted with a low, controlled sound, more felt than heard, and as it lifted, the darkness below seemed to deepen, not just an absence of light, but a presence, a space that held on to its own stillness. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as they adjusted, and then he saw it, a narrow set of steps descending into the earth, carved with precision, not rough, not improvised, but built, intentional, the kind of construction that did not belong in a forgotten cabin miles from the nearest road. And the air that rose from below carried that same metallic scent, stronger now, mixed with something older, something like dust that had not been disturbed in years. Rex took a single step forward and placed his paw on the edge of the opening, then paused, looking back at Ethan, not questioning, not uncertain, just waiting. And that look was enough. It always had been. Ethan nodded once, more to himself than to the dog, and reached for the small flashlight clipped to his pack. The beam flickered on, cutting a narrow path through the darkness, revealing the first few steps, then the next, each one clean, intact, untouched by rot or decay, as if time had respected whatever lay below. He shifted his weight and placed one boot onto the top step, feeling the solid resistance beneath him. Not wood, not earth, but something reinforced, and for a brief second, the world above seemed to fall away, the cabin, the trees, the silence, all of it fading into the background as his focus narrowed to that single downward path, the kind of path that did not just lead somewhere, but led into something. Rex followed without hesitation, his presence close, steady, grounding, and together they began to descend, step by step, the light from above shrinking behind them, the air growing colder but somehow clearer, until the final step brought them onto a smooth concrete floor, and the beam of the flashlight swept across the space ahead, revealing walls that did not belong to decay, but to design, clean lines, straight edges, and at the far end, barely visible in the dim light, a shape that stood out from the rest, a structure within the room itself, waiting, silent, and somehow aware that it was no longer alone. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly as Ethan adjusted his grip, not from fear, but from the quiet weight of the space pressing in around him. And as the light steadied, the room revealed itself piece by piece, the concrete walls smooth and uncracked, untouched by moisture or time. As if the years above had simply passed it by, the air carried a stillness that did not belong underground, not stale, not suffocating, but controlled, preserved, and Rex moved forward with measured steps, his nails making soft, deliberate clicks against the floor that echoed farther than they should have, each sound stretching into the distance before fading into nothing. Ethan followed slowly, the narrow beam of light sweeping across the walls until it settled on the structure at the far end. And as he approached, the shape became clearer. It was not furniture, not storage, but something built with purpose, a large rectangular unit set into the floor and rising waist-high. Its surface smooth steel, edges sharp and precise, and along its side, a series of small markings etched into the metal, not random scratches, but symbols, clean and deliberate. And something about them stirred a distant recognition in Ethan's mind, not a memory fully formed, but a feeling, the kind that lingers just out of reach. Rex stopped a few feet away from it, his posture straight, ears forward, but there was no growl, no tension, just focus, as if he understood that whatever this was, it was not a threat, but something waiting to be understood. Ethan crouched slightly, bringing the light closer to the markings, and as the beam passed over them, he noticed their pattern, not decorative, not artistic, but structured, like codes or identifiers. The kind used in places where everything had a purpose and nothing was left to chance. His breath slowed as his fingers hovered near the surface, and when he finally touched it, the metal was not cold, not in the way he expected. It held a faint warmth, subtle but undeniable, as if something within still carried life, not biological, not human, but active, and that realization settled deep in his chest, quiet but firm. This place had not been abandoned. It had been left in waiting. Rex shifted his weight and glanced briefly toward the stairwell behind them, then back to Ethan, as if reminding him that they were not lost. They had chosen to be here, and Ethan nodded slightly, grounding himself in that thought, before tracing the edge of the structure until his hand found a recessed panel, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, and beneath his touch, a faint vibration returned, softer than before, but steady, rhythmic, like a pulse that had been paused and now resumed, responding to his presence. The air seemed to tighten again, not with fear, but with anticipation, and for a moment, everything held still, the light, the breath, the quiet hum beneath the surface, as if the room itself was waiting for the next decision. And Ethan understood then that whatever this place had been built for, whatever purpose had been buried beneath that cabin, it had not ended. It had simply been waiting for the right moment, for the right person, and somehow, without explanation, he knew that moment had just begun. The faint vibration beneath Ethan's hand did not remain steady for long. It began to shift, subtly at first, like a rhythm adjusting itself, responding not just to his touch but to his presence. And he slowly pulled his hand back, watching as the surface of the steel unit seemed to hum with a quiet awareness, not loud enough to hear, but present enough to feel deep in his chest. Rex stepped closer, his body calm yet alert, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something layered beneath the silence. And for a brief moment, the air in the room changed, not colder, not warmer, but clearer, as if something unseen had aligned itself. Ethan exhaled slowly and let the beam of his flashlight travel across the structure again, this time noticing details he had missed before, a narrow seam running along the top edge, almost invisible, and beside it, a small recessed area shaped not for a key, not for a tool, but for a hand. The realization settled into him quietly. This was not something meant to be forced open. It was meant to be recognized. Rex let out a soft breath and shifted his weight, placing himself directly beside Ethan, his shoulder brushing lightly against his leg, grounding him in the moment. And Ethan crouched lower, studying the Markings once more, the symbols now clearer under the steady beam. And then it came to him, not as a full memory, but as a feeling tied to a place he had once known, a training facility, years ago, where everything had been labeled not with words, but with patterns, identifiers that only a few would understand. His fingers hovered over the recessed panel, hesitation flickering for just a second before giving way to something deeper, something instinctive, and as he placed his palm against it, the reaction was immediate. A soft click echoed from within the structure, followed by a low, controlled hum that spread outward like a ripple through the room. The vibration beneath his boots returned, stronger now, synchronized with the sound, steady and precise. Rex did not flinch, did not step back. He remained still, watching, as if he had expected this all along. The seam along the top of the unit shifted slightly, just enough to break the perfect line of the surface, and a thin line of light appeared, faint and pale, not bright enough to illuminate the room, but enough to suggest something active within. Ethan's breath slowed as he leaned closer, his mind racing not with fear, but with recognition. This was not abandoned. This was operational, and somehow, impossibly, it was responding to him. The air carried a new scent now, cleaner, sharper, like metal warmed by energy rather than time, and for a moment, everything aligned. The silence, the structure, the presence of Rex at his side, all pointing toward a single, undeniable truth. This place had not been forgotten. It had been waiting, and not just for anyone, but for someone who would understand how to listen, how to recognize, how to step forward when everything else said to turn back. And as the faint light beneath the scene grew, just slightly brighter, Ethan realized that whatever lay inside was no longer hidden. It was beginning to reveal itself, piece by piece, as if it had finally decided that he was ready to see it. The thin line of light along the seam did not brighten all at once. It grew slowly, almost cautiously, as if whatever was inside was revealing itself with intention rather than urgency, and Ethan remained still, his hand hovering just inches above the surface, resisting the instinct to rush, because something about this place demanded patience. Rex shifted slightly beside him, lowering his head closer to the edge of the structure, his ears flicking in small, precise movements, tracking something that existed beyond the reach of sound. And then, without warning, the seam widened with a soft, controlled motion, the top panel sliding back just enough to expose what lay within. The light that emerged was not harsh, not artificial in the way Ethan expected, but soft and steady, like a glow that carried its own calm, illuminating a compartment lined with materials that had not aged, had not gathered dust, as if sealed away from time itself. Ethan leaned closer, his breath steady but shallow, and inside he saw a series of objects arranged with deliberate care, not scattered, not stored, but placed, each one positioned with purpose. The first thing that caught his eye was a small rectangular case, its surface smooth and dark, with the same etched symbols he had seen on the exterior, and beside it, a thin stack of documents, edges perfectly aligned, untouched by the years above. Rex let out a quiet exhale, his body relaxing slightly, as if the tension that had followed them into this place had begun to ease. Ethan reached forward slowly, his fingers brushing against the edge of the case, and the moment he made contact, the faint hum in the room shifted again, not louder, not stronger, but different, like a tone changing to match a new presence. He lifted the case carefully, surprised by its weight, solid but balanced, and as he turned it in the light, he noticed a small indentation along one side, shaped perfectly for a thumb, a detail so precise it could not have been accidental. His heart beat a little slower now, not from calm, but from focus, and he pressed his thumb into the indentation. The response was immediate, a soft click followed by a gentle release, the case opening with a smooth, controlled motion, and inside, resting in a fitted compartment, was a metallic tag, simple in design but unmistakable, the kind issued to soldiers, worn close, carried through time and memory, and as the light reflected off its surface, Ethan saw the name etched into it, his own name, clear, precise, undeniable, and for a moment, everything else faded, the room, the structure, the quiet hum beneath his feet, all of it narrowing into that single realization. This had not been left for just anyone. This had been prepared, specifically, intentionally, for him. Rex stepped closer, his nose brushing lightly against Ethan's arm, grounding him in the moment, and Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of understanding settling deeper with each passing second. This was not a coincidence, not a forgotten place stumbled upon by chance. This was something that had been waiting, something that had been built with the expectation that one day he would stand here, open this case, and see what had been left behind. And as his eyes lifted from the tag back to the rest of the compartment, he realized that this was only the beginning. Whatever this place held, whatever purpose it had once served, it was not finished revealing itself yet, and somehow, in a way he could not fully explain, he knew that every step he had taken to reach this moment had been leading here all along. The name on the tag did not feel like a discovery, it felt like a confirmation, something Ethan had always known but never fully understood, and as he held it between his fingers, the faint warmth of the metal lingered, not from the room, not from the air, but from something deeper, something that carried intention. Rex remained close, his presence steady and quiet, watching not the object, but Ethan himself, as if measuring the shift within him, and slowly, Ethan placed the tag back into the case, his movements careful, deliberate. Because this was no longer about curiosity, it was about recognition. His eyes moved to the stack of documents resting beside the case, edges still sharp, surfaces untouched by dust or time. And when he lifted the top page, the paper felt different, thicker, reinforced, the kind used for records that were meant to last. The beam of his flashlight settled over the text, and at first, the words did not register, not because they were unclear, but because they were too familiar, structured in a format he had seen before, reports, logs, identifiers. And then his gaze caught a line that stopped everything else, a designation, a project name, one he had not heard in years but had never truly forgotten. His breath slowed as the memory surfaced, not fully formed, but enough to bring with it a sense of place, a facility, a briefing room, voices that spoke in measured tones about things that were never meant to be explained outside those walls. Rex shifted slightly, his ears tilting as if he too sensed the change, the way the air had grown heavier not with fear, but with meaning. Ethan turned the page, then another, each one revealing fragments of something larger, coordinates, dates, notes that referenced locations and individuals. And then he saw it again, his name, not as a label this time, but within the text, listed, among others, part of something that had been documented long before he ever knew it existed. His fingers tightened slightly on the paper, not from panic, but from the weight of understanding pressing in. This was not something he had stumbled into. This was something he had once been part of, even if he had never been told, even if the memory had been buried beneath years of distance and silence. Rex let out a soft breath and stepped closer, his nose brushing lightly against Ethan's hand, grounding him again, and Ethan lowered the papers slightly, letting the beam of light drift across the rest of the compartment, noticing now the small details he had missed before, a second case, smaller, sealed, and a device embedded into the interior wall of the structure, dark but intact, waiting. Everything here had been placed with purpose, nothing random, nothing forgotten. And that realization settled into him with quiet certainty. This was not the end of a story, it was the continuation of one that had never truly stopped, one that had been paused, hidden, preserved until the moment it could begin again. And as Ethan looked back down at the page in his hand, at the lines that connected him to something far beyond this cabin, he understood that whatever had been left here was not just meant to be found, it was meant to be understood, and more importantly, it was meant to be completed. The words on the page did not demand to be read quickly. They unfolded slowly, as if each line carried a weight that required time to settle, and Ethan felt that weight with every second his eyes moved across the text. The coordinates were familiar now, not in a way he could immediately explain, but in the quiet recognition that lived beneath thought, places he had passed through, locations that had never meant anything at the time, yet now seemed connected by something unseen. Rex remained at his side, still and attentive, his presence steady like a quiet anchor, and as Ethan lowered the document slightly, his gaze shifted toward the second case resting deeper inside the compartment, smaller, darker, its surface untouched, and something about it felt different. Not just an object, but a continuation, a next step. He reached for it slowly, his fingers brushing against its edge, and unlike the first, this one did not respond immediately. There was no click, no release, just a stillness that lingered, as if waiting for something more than touch. Ethan paused, his mind returning to the symbols etched along the structure, the patterns that had stirred something earlier, and he glanced back at the open case, at the tag bearing his name. Understanding forming not in words, but in instinct, he picked it up again, holding it in his palm, and as he brought it closer to the second case, the reaction came, subtle at first, a faint shift in the air, followed by a soft tone, almost inaudible, and then the surface of the case responded, a narrow seam appearing along its edge, just like the first, but slower, more deliberate. Rex lifted his head slightly, ears forward, not alarmed, but aware, as if recognizing the change as something expected, and the case opened with a controlled motion, revealing a single object inside, a small device, compact, its design simple yet precise, with a screen that remained dark. Waiting, Ethan picked it up carefully, turning it in the light, noticing the same markings repeated along its frame, consistent, intentional, and as his thumb brushed against its surface, the screen flickered to life, not bright, not sudden, but steady, displaying a series of lines that shifted into clarity, coordinates again, but this time paired with a timestamp, one that had not passed yet, one that pointed forward rather than back. Ethan felt a quiet tension settle into his chest, not fear, but realization. This was not just a record of what had been, it was a guide for what was to come. Rex stepped closer, his nose hovering near the device, his breath slow and even, as if he too sensed that this was not the end of the discovery, but the beginning of something still unfolding. Ethan looked back at the room, at the structure, at the open compartment that had revealed piece after piece of something carefully hidden, and for the first time since entering, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt purposeful, as if everything here had been waiting not just to be found, but to be understood in the right moment. And as the faint glow of the device reflected in his eyes, Ethan understood that whatever had started here was not meant to stay buried. It was meant to lead him somewhere beyond this place, somewhere only he could go. And somehow, he already knew he would follow it. The glow from the device did not flicker or fade. It held steady in Ethan's hand, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment to come alive. And as he stared at the coordinates on the screen, something deeper than memory began to surface, not clear enough to name, but strong enough to feel, like a path he had once walked without knowing where it led. Rex shifted beside him, his body angling slightly toward the stairwell behind them, not pulling away from the room, but acknowledging a direction, a quiet suggestion that whatever had been revealed here was not meant to keep them below. Ethan lowered the device slightly, his eyes moving once more across the structure, the open compartment, the documents still resting in place, and for a brief moment, he considered staying, reading every page, understanding every detail before taking another step. But the steady glow of the screen told a different story. This was not meant to be solved all at once, it was meant to be followed. Rex took a few steps toward the stairs, then paused, looking back at Ethan with that same calm certainty, and Ethan nodded, slipping the device carefully into his jacket pocket, keeping it close, as if distance might somehow quiet whatever connection had just been established. The air in the room had changed again, not heavier, not lighter, but complete, as if it had fulfilled its purpose for now. And together they turned back toward the narrow staircase, the beam of the flashlight guiding their ascent, step by step, the sound of their movement echoing softly against the walls until the surface above began to reappear, the faint light from the cabin filtering down like a reminder of the world they had come from. Ethan reached the top first, pulling himself up onto the wooden floor, the familiar scent of aged timber and cold air greeting him. But something about it felt different now, not empty, not forgotten, but connected to what lay beneath in a way he could not ignore. Rex followed, emerging with the same steady composure, his ears flicking once as he scanned the room, and for the first time since they arrived. The cabin no longer felt like a place to question, it felt like a place that had served its role. Ethan replaced the wooden panel carefully, setting it back into place until it fit seamlessly with the rest of the floor, as if the hidden space below had never been disturbed. And when he stood, the silence of the cabin returned, but it was no longer heavy. It was quiet in a different way, a quiet that carried understanding rather than uncertainty. Ethan stepped toward the door, pushing it open as the cold air from outside swept in, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and distance. The sky had shifted while they were below, the light softer now, the horizon stretching wide and open, and he paused there for a moment, the device in his pocket feeling heavier than its size suggested, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Rex moved ahead onto the clearing, his posture alert but calm, facing outward as if already oriented toward something unseen, and Ethan followed, his gaze lifting toward the trees beyond the cabin, toward the direction the coordinates might lead. And though he did not yet know what waited there, he understood one thing with quiet certainty. Whatever had been hidden beneath that cabin had not been the destination. It had been the beginning, and the path ahead was already unfolding, one step at a time. Exactly as it was meant to. The wind outside carried a quiet movement through the trees, not strong enough to sway the branches, but enough to whisper across the clearing as Ethan stepped forward, the cabin now behind him, no longer pulling his attention, no longer holding its weight over him. And Rex moved ahead with a steady pace, his nose low, his ears shifting in small, precise motions, tracking something beyond sight. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the device, the screen, still glowing with those same coordinates, unchanged, unwavering, as if they were not just directions but a fixed point in time. He glanced up, aligning his view with the distant line of trees, trying to measure the direction, the distance, but the forest did not offer clear paths, only layers of shadow and light that blended together. And yet Rex did not hesitate. He angled slightly to the right, then began to walk, not fast, not urgent, but certain, and Ethan followed without question, because by now he understood that whatever guided Rex was more reliable than any map. The ground beneath their boots shifted from frozen gravel to packed earth, then to a thin layer of fallen pine needles that softened each step, absorbing sound until even their movement felt quieter than it should have. The deeper they moved into the trees, the more the world behind them seemed to fade, the cabin disappearing from view, the open sky narrowing into thin strips between branches, and the air changed again, carrying a faint metallic edge that did not belong in the forest, subtle at first, but growing clearer with each step. Ethan slowed slightly, noticing how the device in his hand responded, the light on the screen shifting almost imperceptibly, not blinking, not flashing, but adjusting, as if tracking their movement in real time. Rex stopped suddenly, his body going still, ears forward, his gaze fixed ahead at something hidden just beyond the next line of trees. Ethan stepped beside him, following that line of sight, and at first, there was nothing, just more forest, more shadow, more stillness, but then he saw it. A break in the natural pattern, a shape that did not belong, low to the ground, partially covered by years of fallen leaves and moss. A structure, not large, not obvious, but there, waiting. The closer they moved, the clearer it became. A concrete slab, set into the earth, edges worn but intact, its surface marked by the same symbols Ethan had seen below the cabin. The same deliberate etchings that spoke of purpose rather than decoration. Rex approached it slowly, his nose brushing the surface, then pausing as if confirming something, and Ethan crouched beside it, his fingers tracing the markings, feeling the shallow grooves beneath his touch. And once again, that same quiet recognition surfaced, not from memory, but from something deeper, something that connected this place to the one they had just left, to the documents, to the device, to him. He reached into his pocket and pulled the device closer, holding it above the slab, and the response was immediate. The glow on the screen intensified slightly, not brighter, but sharper, more defined, and for a moment, the forest around them seemed to fall silent in a different way, not empty, but attentive, as if something unseen had shifted its focus. Toward them, Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand steady as he looked from the device to the slab and back again, understanding settling into place with quiet certainty. The path had not ended at the cabin. It had only led them here, to the next point, the next layer, And whatever lay beneath this second structure was not separate from what they had found before. It was part of the same design, the same intention, unfolding step by step, exactly as it was meant to the surface of the concrete slab did. Not resist when Ethan placed his hand against it. Instead, it responded with that same subtle shift he had felt before, a quiet alignment between what was hidden and what had arrived. And as he brought the device closer, the glow on the screen steadied into something sharper, more defined, the coordinates fading as a new pattern emerged, a sequence that mirrored the etched symbols beneath his fingers, and without hesitation, he pressed the device against the center of the slab. The reaction was immediate. A low, controlled vibration spread outward through the ground, not violent, not sudden, but precise, like a mechanism waking after a long and patient silence. Rex stepped back half a pace, not out of fear, but to observe, his posture calm, his gaze fixed, as if he understood this was a moment that needed space. The slab beneath Ethan's hand shifted slightly, a seam appearing along its edge just as it had below the cabin, and slowly, almost respectfully, the concrete lifted, revealing a narrow opening beneath, darker than the first, deeper, and as the air rose from it, it carried a different scent, not just metal and dust, but something cleaner, almost untouched, as if whatever lay below had remained sealed not just from time, but from the world itself. Ethan crouched lower, his flashlight cutting into the darkness, revealing a second set of steps, similar in design, but leading farther down, disappearing into a depth that felt more deliberate, more concealed, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, not because of fear, but because of the realization that each step forward was taking him deeper into something that had been designed long before he understood it. Rex moved closer again, placing himself at the edge of the opening, his ears flicking once, then settling, his presence steady, unwavering, and Ethan nodded slightly, grounding himself in that quiet companionship before stepping down. The descent was longer this time, the air cooler but not uncomfortable, the walls closer, guiding rather than enclosing, and when his boots reached the bottom, the beam of light revealed a space unlike the one before, smaller, more focused, with a single structure at its center, not large, not complex, but precise, a console built into the floor, its surface smooth, its edges marked with the same symbols, and, at its center, a recessed area shaped for the device in his hand. Ethan stepped forward slowly, every movement measured, as if the space itself was watching, waiting for him to understand, and when he placed the device into the slot, it fit perfectly, not loosely, not tightly, but exactly as it was meant to. The response came instantly, a soft tone echoed through the room, followed by a gentle rise in light from within the console, illuminating the space with a calm, steady glow, and then the surface shifted, revealing a screen that flickered to life, lines of text forming one by one, not rushed, not chaotic, but deliberate. And as Ethan leaned closer, his breath slowing, his eyes focused, he saw it. Not coordinates, not data, but a message, simple, clear, and unmistakably meant for him. And in that quiet moment, with Rex standing beside him and the light surrounding them both, Ethan understood that whatever this place had been built for, whatever had been hidden beneath layers of silence and time, it had led him here for a reason, and that reason was no longer hidden. It was waiting to be read. The message did not appear all at once. It revealed itself line by line, each word forming with a quiet precision that made it feel less like text and more like something being remembered. And Ethan stood still as the glow reflected across his face, his eyes moving slowly, absorbing each sentence as if rushing would somehow break its meaning. The first line was simple, almost calm. It read that this place had never been meant to hide anything. It had been built to preserve what mattered until the right moment arrived. Ethan's breath slowed, his mind tracing the weight behind those words. And as the next lines appeared, the message shifted, becoming more personal. It spoke of a program, not one recorded in official history, but one designed to observe, to guide, to protect those who carried something unseen. Individuals chosen not for what they knew, but for how they responded to what they did not understand. Ethan felt a quiet tension settle in his chest, not from fear, but from recognition, as if something within him was aligning with what he was reading. Rex remained at his side, his body relaxed, his presence steady, and as the message continued, the tone softened, becoming less like a report and more like a voice. It spoke directly to him now, acknowledging his name, not as a label, but as a certainty. It said that the path he had taken, the choices he had made, the quiet decisions that had defined him without recognition, had all been seen, had all mattered, and Ethan felt something shift inside him, something deeper than understanding, something closer to acceptance. The next line appeared more slowly, as if carrying greater weight. It explained that the structures, the cabin, the hidden rooms, the devices, had never been abandoned. They had been waiting, not for just anyone, but for someone who would arrive without expectation, who would listen instead of dismiss, who would follow without needing to know the end. And Ethan's hand rested lightly against the console as he read, his breathing steady, his thoughts quiet. The final lines appeared with a soft glow, almost gentle. They did not instruct, they did not command. They simply stated that the path did not end here, that what had been revealed was not a destination, but a beginning, and that whatever came next would not be guided by systems or structures, but by the same instinct that had brought him this far, the same quiet awareness that Rex had always carried. The screen dimmed slightly as the message completed, leaving the room in a calm, steady light. And Ethan remained there for a moment, not moving, not speaking, just standing with the weight of it settling into place. Rex shifted closer, pressing lightly against his leg, grounding him once again, and Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze lifting from the screen to the space around him. No longer searching, no longer questioning, but understanding. And in that quiet moment, beneath the surface of the world, he realized that whatever had led him here had never been about uncovering something hidden. It had been about recognizing something that had always been part of him, something that had simply been waiting for him to see it clearly. The light in the chamber softened as the screen dimmed, not shutting off completely, but settling into a quiet glow that felt less like technology and more like something at rest. And Ethan slowly withdrew his hand from the console, the faint warmth lingering against his skin as if the place itself had acknowledged him. Rex shifted beside him, his posture relaxed now, the tension that had followed them through each step replaced by a calm certainty. And together they stood there for a moment longer, not searching, not questioning, simply existing in the stillness that had finally become clear rather than heavy. Ethan took a slow breath and turned toward the stairs, the path upward no longer unknown, no longer uncertain, just a continuation, each step measured, steady, the light from above growing stronger as they ascended, until the forest air greeted them once again, cool and open, carrying the scent of pine and distance. And when Ethan stepped fully into the clearing, he paused, not because he needed to, but because something within him asked for it. The cabin stood behind him, unchanged, quiet, no longer holding any mystery, only a quiet presence, like a place that had fulfilled its purpose without needing to explain it. Rex moved a few steps ahead, then stopped, turning back briefly, his amber eyes steady, as if confirming that nothing had been lost, only understood. Ethan walked forward, his gaze lifting beyond the trees, the world stretching out in a way that felt different now, not larger, but clearer. The device in his pocket remained still, its glow gone, its role complete, and he realized then that it had never been meant to guide him forever, only to bring him to the point where he no longer needed guidance. The wind moved gently through the branches, carrying a quiet sound that no longer felt like a whisper of something hidden, but like a reminder of something present. And Ethan's steps grew lighter, not because the path ahead was easy, but because it no longer needed to be explained. Rex walked beside him now, not leading, not following, but simply there, a steady presence that had always known when to move and when to wait. And as they reached the edge of the clearing, where the forest opened into a wider horizon, Ethan stopped once more, his eyes tracing the line where the trees met the sky. And for the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was searching for something. He felt like he had already found it, not in the structures beneath the ground, not in the messages or the devices, but in the quiet understanding that had followed him back into the light. And as he stepped forward again, leaving the cabin behind without looking back, the world did not shift or change, it simply continued, exactly as it always had. Only now, he understood his place within it, and perhaps that had been the purpose all along, not to reveal a secret hidden beneath the earth, but to remind him that some truths are not buried. They are simply waiting for the moment you are ready to see them.